Hello, it's Wednesday afternoon, it's 3:30, so it must be fun skills time. Welcome again. This month is when we start to bring the functional skills reforms to a bit more to life. We've really packed an agenda, a really jam-packed agenda today, as we're starting to share more information about how our new assessments are shaping up, as well as putting them into context. We're in Wakefield today, it's the usual Fun Skills 3 crew. Paul Seeney, busy month?
Yeah, very busy actually. Lots of travelling around the country, lots of talking to colleges, training organisations about functional skills reform.
Amanda Kelly, lots going on?
Hello, yes, I've had a particularly busy month. Yesterday's highlight was going to the AOC English and Maths conference, where there was lots of exciting things being talked about.
And I'm Catherine Cooper. If you joined us last month, you might recall we had a few sound problems. Apologies for that. Hopefully that won't be the case this time.
It's the usual drill. Please post any questions as they come into your mind. We are exceptionally busy this month, so we can't necessarily promise to answer them live, but if we don't manage to get to answer them, we will bank them and we'll add them to the ever-growing list of FAQs about the functional skills reforms. So this month's session is called Sneak Preview. We thought that might whet your appetite, but in essence, we're moving into the period when this all starts to become a bit more real and a bit more immediate. It's great that you're here, but please, please, please make sure that your colleagues are engaged with the functional skills reforms as well. As we've said before, functional skills touches so many people that even small changes can have widespread implications. These changes hopefully won't upset the apple cart too much, but at the same time, please do ensure that your senior leaders are properly informed about what's coming. We know almost everyone is keen to see the new assessments as soon as possible, but at the same time, it is important to put them into context. That's why we'll be focusing again on the new subject content for both maths and English. We can't overstate the importance of really getting underneath these if you are to understand and work successfully with the new qualifications assessments. That said, we will be sharing a bit more about how our new assessments are shaping up. What we show you today will come with a health warning, simply because, like all awarding organisations, we're still in the process of sharing our plans with Ofqual, and until we receive a final green light from them, there's still a possibility that they might change. At this stage, that's unlikely to be more than the odd tweak, but nevertheless, please do keep this in mind.
So, let's re-familiarise ourselves with the new functional skills documents. The subject content is the one that everyone involved in delivering functional skills really needs to engage with. If you're looking at these slides later, you will be able to access these documents by clicking on them. Whilst the regulatory documents are intended primarily for awarding organisations, we'd still recommend you have a look at them, as they will help you understand the parameters we're needing to operate within.
So, it's poll time. This month we're going to be doing a bit of myth busting, so we're going to start off here with a few true or false questions. Learners will be able to use a bilingual dictionary in English writing at level 1 if English isn't their first language. True or false? Give you a few more seconds to vote. Polls coming in, still answering. We're getting there. We're up to 70% voted, 75 now. Another 3 or 4 more seconds. And we'll close the poll now. So, exactly 60-40 the response is. Pleased to say that 60% of you got it correct. It's false. Dictionaries will no longer be, as we'll go on to say in a second, dictionaries won't be permitted at all within writing in future. So, another question. True or false again? Learners will be expected to recite the phonetic alphabet at entry 3. True or false? Almost want to put the countdown clock on this, don't I, in the end?
Don't sing it, please.
I won't.
I have to refrain myself then from doing it.
No, I won't. Okay, I think most of you voted now. And again, 73% of you said it was false, and you will be correct in saying so. Well, I know anybody who attended the phonics session that we did just before Christmas will have learnt a bit more about how phonics can be used as a teaching strategy, but it's not something that we're going to be assessing as part of the qualification. Okay, another one. Learners will now need to multiply and divide up to 2 decimal places at level 1. Most of you voted. We'll give it another few more seconds. Again, as I always say, apologies if you're listening to this on catch-up. You won't have had a chance to vote. And I can't even say you may still be charged. Okay. Again, I think you're doing pretty well on these questions. Actually, 88% of you said that was true, and you'd be correct. It is true. So just a couple more questions. And this one, be careful because it's a negative question. Learners won't need to calculate the value of angles and coordinates at level 2. Two-thirds of you voted now. I'm just getting a few more seconds.
We should have a countdown clock.
We should really. We'll do that for next month, actually, yeah. Okay, and close. So, 82% of you said that would be that was false. That in other words, that learners would need to calculate the value of angles and coordinates at level 2. And again, you'd be correct in saying that. So just one more poll, and then we'll move on. Hopefully, we'll see how you do with this one. And learners will still need to problem solve. Nine. 80% of you voted. I think we're nearly there. So we'll close that. Almost unanimity on this one, actually. Learners will still need to problem solve. We'll say a bit more about how in a moment, but brilliant. Thanks again, as always, for these. And back to the slide deck. Hopefully you'll have the slide deck back. Yeah, that's better. And we'll move on.
Okay, so part of this month's webinar is to explore the scope of study for the reform. We've extracted the range of topics that we'll be expecting to be taught at each level. These extracts came from the DFE subject content documents that we keep referring to. This is a screenshot from level 1 English, but the scope of study is set out in a similar way across each of the other levels, as well as in the maths content document. Each level also builds on the levels below. English is, as you'd expect, divided into speaking, listening and communicating, reading and writing. What is immediately apparent is that there's more detail than there was in the old subject criteria. And here's the extract from writing. There's now a clear distinction within the subject content between spelling, punctuation and grammar, or SPAG as we know it, and composition. For assessment purposes, the mark weightings for SPAG versus content are still likely to be around 40 versus 60%.
Turning our attention now to maths, here we have a screenshot of the scope of study for number within level 1 mathematics. As you'd expect, the scope of study is split into the familiar number, measure, shape and space, and handling data that we've been used to for many years. Again, what's noticeable here is that there's a lot more detail than there was in the previous functional skills specifications, and there are some new topics or movement of topics between levels. Our mapping documents highlight these changes in the new content compared with the existing functional skills and adult core curriculum. We'll say a bit more about those in a moment.
And here we have the screenshots for level 1, measure, shape and space and handling data. There are some new bits of content here, for example using angles, and probability has also crept in at level 1.
And this is how problem-solving aspect of the subject content is now addressed. The concepts of represent, analyse and interpret are not visible in quite the same way as before, but conceptually you can see that they are still there, so we aren't losing problem-solving at level 1 and level 2.
It's a good thing, and it's a good thing that the poll showed that I think most people understood that. So here's a reminder that we've produced subject content mapping documents for both subject areas. These are available from the Functional Skills Updates page on our website.
Just to give you a flavour of the English document, the new functional skills content is in the left column, with the current functional skills and adult literacy presented alongside for comparison. Again, the example here is from level 1.
Similarly, the maths document compares the new functional skills content with the current FS skills standards and adult numeracy standards. It's worth saying that anything highlighted in red in these documents is where something differs significantly. For example, here, multiply and divide decimals up to 2 decimal places is now going to be expected at level 1.
Turning our attention now to the assessment expectations, it's again worth putting these into the context of what's in the subject content and a reminder of the purpose and aim of Functional Skills English. There's some key phrases in this, including demanding content, applying to different contexts, confidence and fluency, and sound grasp.
Again, from the subject content document, there are some subtle changes to how reading and writing are defined. Crucially, there's now a stipulation that writing must involve working without dictionaries or spelling or grammar checkers. They remain available for reading.
This is the interesting bit, the sneak preview. Before we go any further, let's just say that we are still in the process of working with Optical to finalise some of the detail here. So please treat accordingly. Writing is still 50 marks, that's 25 marks per question, and there will still be 2 tasks to complete. Unlike the current assessments, the 2 documents won't necessarily be linked.
And on to reading. Again, all of this is subject to final confirmation with the regulator. It'll still be possible to use a mixture of delivery methods between the 2 external components. For example, you could complete reading on paper and writing on screen, or vice versa. Reading will involve a series of questions, a mixture of multiple choice and short answer. Some will be open and some will be fixed response, much as it is at the moment. Both levels will now only have 2 source documents. If you're familiar with our current level 2, 3 tends to be the norm there. Both levels will now be marked out of 30 rather than 40. This means we can move away from some of the longer listing questions. For example, give 5 examples of bias that you would often see in some of the current papers. Level 1 reading also now requires learners to compare across documents. That used to be only the case at level 2, but it's now going to be there at level 1 as well. We also see the return of our old friend, those of us who have been around since the days of key skills, of inferring from images. Again, that applies at both level 1 and level 2.
Speaking, listening and communicating, not communication, has a few changes. At level 1, candidates will now need to give a talk or explanation, as well as taking part in a discussion. This might be helpful if you've had a mixed group of learners, as there's a greater similarity between the activities at level 1 and level 2. We've also added a short third activity to help you ensure that candidates are able to hit all of the criteria. It should be in practice pretty easy to accommodate, as it's basically just following up the talk or presentation with a brief discussion. In many cases that will happen anyway, so it's just about capturing that as evidence. There will be new recording forms along with similar lines to what we have at the moment, and there'll be guidance on how to complete them.
Turning our attention to the assessment expectations, for maths, it's worth putting these into context of what is in the subject content, a reminder of the purpose and the aim of functional skills mathematics. Again, some key phrases here include demanding content, applying to different contexts, confidence and fluency, and sound grasp. You will remember those from the English.
Indeed, and as with the English, the assessment information here is all comes with that usual caveat of being subject to final confirmation with the regulator. We are, however, for maths, intending to start sharing draft versions of the assessments in the next few days. If you signed up for our regular email updates, you should get an alert with a link to these during next week. Within maths, around or at least 80% of the scope of study will need to be addressed in every assessment paper. So there is quite, although there is some sampling, it's quite sort of most of the content will be assessed every time. The biggest structural change that you will see, kind of, if you think about the current assessments and what the new assessments will look like, is that there will be in future 2 sections to each paper. The first non-calculator section will be largely focused on underpinning skills, with section B containing more problem solving. Unlike our current free task model, the questions will build up gradually rather than throwing candidates immediately into a complex problem.
Okay, so this is what we're currently working on with a view to starting to release once we have a green light from the regulator. The materials broadly replicate what we have at the moment: a handbook, subject specification documents, guidance for delivery, and worked examples. We're initially committing to at least 2 sample papers per subject, but we'll be adding to these. There will also be new Smart Swing content and updated e-functional skills. We'll say more about this next month. Our launch events will kick off after Easter, and we will continue into the autumn. They'll be scattered right across England, and do bear in mind we'll be issuing digital credentials to those who participate in these sessions.
If you haven't already used the readiness checklist, it will almost certainly help with your planning for September. Even if you looked at it when it first came out last September, it will be worth dusting it down and going through it again to see how much further on you are there now. Like the mapping guides, it's on our functional skills updates page. Paul, I think it's time for another poll.
Yeah, we'll just throw one more poll in just to sort of keep you all on your toes. Just the last one. And again, you may or may not be able to answer this at this stage, but please just sort of give us your best guess at the moment. So when do you think you might be holding your first live assessments under the new functional skills specifications? Early September, during October, November, during December, January, next spring or next summer? Again, best guesses at the moment, not necessarily immediate. I appreciate if you're in a roll-on, roll-off environment, it will tend to be likely to be earlier. If you're in a traditional academic year pattern, I guess there may not be many going through on the new until some months after they come in. But it's useful anyway for us just to get a sense of where you're going. So most of you voted. I'll just give you a few more seconds. I think most are getting there. Okay, that's great. Thanks. We'll close that. So, big chunk of you looking for them during the autumn. I think that chimes with some of our thinking internally. So that suggests that we are, and it reinforces, I think, where our thinking had got to, that most people needed to sort of, or that we needed to be in a position to be able to accommodate those. Few of you are actually looking for them during September. Probably worth us saying that might prove challenging in practice, but we will, certainly we're committed to trying to make them available as early as possible. Worth, I think, also just saying that the new assessments, when we do roll them out, as with the current assessments, we will initially have to go through a process of awarding new papers and setting pass marks for them, which may involve us having to sort of gather a critical mass of data before we can start pushing results out the door. Again, one of the things that makes that job easier is if we have a greater number of assessments quite early on, that will make that easier to do. Just finally, before we move on to the next slide, if you haven't already done so, we'd encourage you to sign up for the monthly email alerts and updates. This is just so we can keep you with all the latest information, particularly the new launch events, and also, as I mentioned a second ago, the new math sample assessments that we're looking to release shortly. The slide wouldn't move on then.
Okay. Finally, one other significant difference happening as part of the reforms, the pressure from this has come from both DfE and Ofqual, although we've been pressing for this to ensure that there is a level playing field between awarding organisations.
This is something that we, as an awarding organisation, will be taking part in alongside all of the other awarding organisations. We currently hold the chair of the Federation of Awarding Bodies Functional Skills Group, although there is something where this is a shared interest from all awarding organisations in making this work. At the heart of it really is the idea of having explicit past descriptors, a shared understanding of what good enough looks like at each level. That initial work is already underway, and where it's happened, we're using the current functional skills assessments as the basis for this. So really just to reinforce that this isn't about making functional skills harder.
Again, this isn't about making everyone's assessments exactly the same, but more about ensuring a consistent level of demand.
Whilst the DfE subject content documents that we keep banging on about are an absolute must-read, there are plenty of other support resources available from both the Education Training Foundation and AELP. There's links to them on these slides, and when you get copies of these sent out, you'll be able to obviously follow those links. We also have our own CPD programme to support English and Maths teaching.
Yes, here's the forthcoming dates for these sessions. Just to be clear, these are intended to help you with the teaching and learning of maths and English in general, rather than necessarily or solely functional skills. Please note that these sessions are chargeable. These CPD sessions are also entirely separate from Fund Skills 2019 launch events, which we'll be announcing dates for these shortly.
So a little bit of sort of housekeeping practical stuff to bear in mind. We, I think, let the cat out of the bag last month by talking about the new 4-digit number for functional skills, 4748. Just to be clear and to reiterate, the old functional skills assessments will remain available for registered candidates for the bulk of the next academic year, although we will need to phase them out quite early on, as there's absolutely no give on the 31st of August 2020 deadline for certification. 4748, as we said, it will be our new number. We'll be announcing the exact structure, for example, the configuration of 6-digit codes in due course.
We're back again in 4 weeks' time, so don't forget to join us then. Do get in touch if you've got any further questions. The email address is fsreform@ and not functional skills reform. Next month's topic will be support and digital resources.
Which just leads us to the final slide with the usual list of contacts. As Catherine has just said, do get in touch if you've got any further questions. I will have a very quick sneaky glance at the questions that have come through just to see if there's anything burning. We'll obviously try and answer those sort of as and when, if we can't sort of deal with them in the here and now. I think one question about the phonics webinar in December about whether we can whether we can kind of make copies of those available.
So perhaps I could just say we're planning to post on the functional skills updates page a flyer from the ETF, so that the phonics webinar was hosted by ourselves, but it was actually delivered by the specialist at the ETF, and therefore the content belongs to them. So we weren't able to record it or share recordings on our website. So we will be posting the flyer to make that available so that you know where to track down more information about the phonics CPD.
Just a very quick practical question has also come through, just to reiterate that this recording will be shared. If you've signed up for these webinars, you will get an email in the next day or so with a link to a recording of this session and also the slides. They will all be added to the Functional Skills Updates page. Worth noting, I think another interesting question actually might prompt a little bit of discussion. The new specs and quals are more rigorous. How does this impact on the value of the qualifications already obtained by learners? Well, interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah. Very interesting question. There has been no intention that learners who've sat the existing qualifications would be required to resit.
No.
Functional skills is still functional skills, but the rigor is as much around the assessment structure as it is about the content.
Yeah. I mean, I think the key point behind that is that the old qualifications don't cease to be valid. It's a bit like the change from the old A star to G GCSEs to 9 to 1 GCSE. They're still GCSEs. They're still valid qualifications. Just the newer versions will have some changes to them. Just saying that sample papers. I think we've answered that already. 2 sections. The calculator and non-calculator bit and invigilation. We'll touch on that, I think, as well. That really is something that we will become, I think, apparent when we start to share the sample papers, because you'll see the sort of structure.
It's probably worth saying that we will be preparing new guidance for exam and assessment invigilation to support centres with managing that process.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we were conscious to try, or anxious to try and avoid in that, was making it difficult to, making it too difficult to manage that, but also recognising that although the non-calculator bit is roughly a quarter of the total marks, not everybody is going to need the same amount of time on it. So there will still be an overall time allowance for the paper as a whole, but within the non-calculator section, that has to be done first, and once that's taken off the learner, they will have a calculator and they'll be able to carry on. As you appreciate, it's probably easier to manage that on screen than it is on paper, because we can automate that through the Evolve system. For paper, it will be a case of managing that locally, but as Amanda says, there'll be guidance to help with that. A couple of questions about entry level, just to say similar, same timescales in terms of launching those, so they will be rolled out at the same time. Again, we'll be starting to share those as soon as we're in a position to do so. A couple of questions also about the third speaking and listening activity. I think we were kind of wary about saying too much about that, because I think we were conscious that might set hairs running if we weren't careful. Really, all it's trying to do is, because there are slightly more criteria than there were in the old subject specs for speaking and listening, it's really about trying to make sure that everything is captured. So really, and again, given that every learner is going to have to do a talk or presentation or explanation, even at level 1, to really just follow that up with a very short discussion afterwards.
Perhaps the key word is informal.
Yeah.
I think many of us with learners will know that if they've given a short talk or presentation, there's a natural period of Q&A that follows that, and I think we need to reinforce that this is that natural occurring informal question.
It's just capturing that, isn't it? Yeah.
Lots of people do tend to put that in anyway as evidence, and it's just making sure that we do that. Did somebody ask about the 4 digits again, Paul?
They did, yeah. Just to reiterate, it's 4748 is the new number.
Yes, you won't find anything on the website under that number just at the moment, but that will be coming shortly.
It will be starting to appear over the next couple of months. Do we think, another quick question, do we know if there are any plans to change apprenticeship funding rules at level 2? I think the short answer to that is there's no plan. There is an increase to the guided learning hours from 45 to 55, but certainly from the conversations we've had so far with the ESFA, there's no plan from their part to look at the actual funding rates.
Okay.
I think we're getting towards the end.
Yes, yeah. So thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to joining you next month.
Yeah, next month.
And it's digital digital resources is our sort of topic for next month. So have a good next few weeks. Enjoy looking at the subject content documents and or going through them again and getting familiar with them, and do enjoy looking at the maths documents when we start sharing those. But again, thank you, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
It was great.